I like that young people always find new ways to look silly. It's like a gift for people getting older, you know? It's a treat.
Yeah.
It almost takes the edge off, but
I mean,
not
to be
quite.
fair, old people also find new ways to look silly.
True.
So don't write us
Usually
out.
in the same way.
Yeah, well, listen, when you're in the middle, when you're not very young or very old, that's when you look normal. No one tells you that, but it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kyle, you might be peaking a little too.
Okay, you are also peaking a little bit, so we should
You'll
bring
crank
it down.
too
Oh, I
hard.
overcranked? Hold on, let me
We're over cranking. I see myself
Yeah.
clipping.
let me reduce the crank. Are we
How
is
about
this
this? Can we hear me okay when I talk at this volume?
You're beautiful.
I
Sounds
hear
good?
you. I see
Okay,
you.
Yeah. Oh, hi, buddy.
I feel
Hi,
seen
buddy.
and heard. I feel very seen
I am sitting my ass
Okay,
down
man.
and listening.
to 16th century madrigals.
Oh, fuck yeah. This is my shit. That one, like dude who does like the cool like video essays about like Orientalism and music just did one about bardcore and then actual medieval music, and I was like, yes, give it to me.
Very.
Yeah.
I'm Justin. I am working on my masterpiece of podcasting, and my pronouns are he and they.
I'm Sadie. I am obsessed with the Roman ruins that are on top of the pagan ruins, and my pronouns are they, them.
Oh shit. I am Jay. I am currently having a little secret gay tryst in the Forbidden Library, and my pronouns are he, him.
And we have guests. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. I love introducing myself. I'm Kay of Kay and Skittles, they, them. I will be, for the entirety of this podcast, wielding an illegal weapon, but I live in the UK, so it's not that impressive.
My name is Kyle. My pronouns are he and him, and I am currently locked inside of a room with only one window, and I'm seeing crazy visions of mostly
Well done, everyone.
Yeah, Justin always springs these on us, and I'm like, oh shit, I have to be funny on cue, and I'm not funny on cue.
That's when the juice happen. No, that's when the juice happen. Oh, it's spiritual and spiritual fulfillment. Really, what we're doing is we're saying that you yourself have the motivation towards salvation and do not need to receive that from the Holy Apostolic Church.
Lucky.
I think one of us might be the weird Gnostic out in the woods, though.
At least, yeah.
At least.
Yeah, exchanging.
favors.
Yes, you still have the drop.
I am reorganizing my soundboard because I cannot just reorganize it like a normal person, so I have to rebuild it. So I've got like 8 of them so far, and so I'm just rebalancing the audio as well.
Excellent. I'm in a Discord group where we play games together sometimes, and the soundboard is entirely Always Sunny clips, and we filled up the allotment with it.
Oh, that sounds fun as hell.
Oh, I should get the Always Sunny intro. That could work.
That's pretty good. Also, when someone pulls off something impressive, they get the drop, I'm a golden god. You know, it's feels good every time.
I'd want to be like wild card, like Gas Man Charlie.
Mhm.
Yeehaw! Like kicking the door
that's
of the van
good.
open.
My tools. They're my tools.
This is our Always Sunny podcast.
We're here to talk about Always Sunny, right? Is that not?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I'm Danny DeVito.
the show that I'm slowly forcing onto Justin.
You're right to do
Always
it.
sunny in Bavaria.
That,
It is Always
know
Sunny
what?
in Bavaria,
you know what?
seemingly, except when it floods. Although I was talking to Kay beforehand. Kay, did you bring us any gamer news to warm up on?
Oh, there's so much gamer news. So the thing about me is I keep it all. I keep it all in this sort of database that if I ever just want to have a bad day, I'll look at it. And I'm going to paint a picture of the database of gamer news. It's just a list of headlines with the word layoffs in them again and again.
No.
Different companies and different countries and different cities. Everyone's mad at Ubisoft for another round of layoffs. I think they did it in May or April, and now they're doing it again in Toronto, which, I mean, bad things happening to Canadians. I want to endorse that, but not like this. So they canned like 30 people, I think, in their Toronto studio. And they said it was so that they could reach their annual targets or whatever, which This sucks, man. The AAA industry has been kind of caving in on itself, and I found it really interesting. And something I wanted to hear what all of you thought about is the way that what's it called? It's not E3 anymore. Jeff Keighley cooed the whole thing. Summer Games Fest, he calls it, I think.
Mhm.
It felt like from Jeff himself, as well as a lot of people there was a real push for saying, actually, yeah, the big companies do kind of blow shit, but the indie sphere is where like actual interesting stuff tends to be happening, which is really weird because these events are normally about worshipping like 5 or 6 companies. I don't know. What do you guys have any thoughts on that? Maybe a bit of a shift, a bit of people recognizing that actually a lot of these games made by like 3 people are really good, which is relevant to today's topic as well, of course.
I still don't know what video games are.
God, I wish that was me.
Wait, why do you two know about video games? Wink.
Oh yeah, we have a
Yeah.
podcast. It's called All Gamers Are Bastards. We never promote it. That's one of the things that
okay.
we do for some reason.
Well, it's the only podcast about video games, and we don't want people to steal our idea.
I see. I
you know,
see.
so we kind of keep it on the DL.
We
I
also
see.
use it to take over other podcasts. Not this one
Yeah.
though. Y'all are cool.
Just kidding. This
but-
is a Marty O'Donnell campaign support podcast now. That's
now
what we're about.
Now y'all have to talk
You're
about
doing entryism.
Yeah, we're doing podcast entryism, and it's all just to support the guy who composed the music from Halo, who's running for Congress in Nevada. And it's probably going to win the primary. If not it's a very competitive seat in the general election, but he has a real shot of it. We've been covering it exclusively as the official Marty O'Donnell podcast. He has not blocked us or sent us any cease and desists yet, so we're still working on trying to get
he pays
that.
us in Bitcoin, so that means keep going, right?
Yeah, and then we launder it back into his campaign in legal ways.
Yeah, we try to avoid using the word launder for what we're doing.
What if it's legally though? They're just doing laundry.
I like to think of it as cleansing, which is a far less,
problematic
no
term.
one's got an
Problematic
issue with that. Yeah, we're just
You're
cleansing
doing
the
like
money.
a celery juice cleanse with it.
That's right.
That's what it's good for you. It's healthy. Like Marty O'Donnell will be for the economy.
Yeah. And for wokeness. He doesn't like. Do you think he likes wokeness? Guess again. He doesn't.
He invented music. He's gonna defeat wokeness. I'm not quite sure how those two things go together, but I trust the plan.
Yeah, trust the process from Mr. Halo,
John Halo.
Don't doubt John Halo's plan for your life. That's the.
I've got a quote from him right here. It says, "Gotta get through the primary. Not that many folks in the district have played Halo."
Really,
So I mean, that's his
that.
biggest. That's
Fuck.
his biggest, like...
Shit. Kyle, I didn't realize that.
He's going to get primaried by people who only play, like, FromSoft games.
Oh man,
Fucking nerds.
We will. So we're gonna set up a debate between him and not his Democratic opponent, because he's a Republican, for the record.
It took me a long time to get to the part of the article that told me what he was running on.
Don't worry about that stuff.
Yeah, it's a mixture of economic protectionism, border security, and by border security we mean the space border. To stay away from
the border that's up.
Yeah, I'm stalling for time to try and remember the names of the bad guys in Halo. The Flood. They're trying to.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Is that it?
There's
And the Covenant. Then the Covenant's
them too.
breakaway Protestant sect.
Yeah.
Wait, there's Protestants in space? All right, now we need to go to war with space.
Who else is going to colonize space? Come on.
Last week was transhuman Mormon transhumanists, and this week it's Protestants in space.
Nice.
Apparently there's Mormon transhumanists and they have their own conference.
Well, of course they do. Mormons love conferencing.
They fucking... Do you know how many times I couldn't get around Salt Lake City because of the fucking conference?
I was
What
going to say the
happened?
general conference is like the all church worship session, so like twice a year or whatever. So like yeah.
They shut downtown down.
Well, they're so organized. I mean, I get it. Franklin Covey is like a whole thing. Like
they're so hot,
Covey
too.
method.
It's sad.
Yeah.
What? That's not true. What?
It's unfortunately true.
Fuck. This
Yeah.
changes everything. I don't think we have Mormons in this country. We have a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, which is weird. But they don't go door to door. They stand around with flyers and everyone ignores them. It's
Oh yeah, we
Mhm.
have those in all the T stations here.
Yeah, they don't like try to lure you in. They just stand there like stone silent, and it's creepy.
I would love to meet a British Mormon who's like, yes, absolutely. I'm all about this entirely America focused religion.
Trying not to do an offensive accent right now.
I mean,
And he's
So
really
hard.
into American football as well.
Oh,
Like,
that's
we'll
got to
only
be the most
talk about it.
racist man ever made in a lab. Like,
But what if he gets into like because there are like weirdly there's like Mormon socialists because like
it's
there's
not
like
going to be this one, not the British one.
Yeah, no.
Mhm.
But what if it was?
A British guy who's into American football is the worst vibe I can fathom. It's difficult to explain, but it's
Yeah,
it's
the
One
guy-
more
the-
cases.
Isn't Ed Zitron
the NFL's playing
into
more in
American
London now.
football?
What? Sorry, Kyle. Did you just say the NFL's playing in London?
Yeah, they have a game in London every year.
We need to put a stop to this. Hold on.
I'm talking about
Hang on.
invasions.
The election's in
political
like a few
platform.
days. I think I can get on the ballot still. I need to run on stopping this.
Reverse Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
No, put this in like Nigel Farage's platform. It's like, we're going to give you all free money and ban American football.
It would work.
Shit, that would work. I think he'd probably be prime minister on that.
He's the only British politician who figured out you can just lie about costs of things, and everyone is powerless in the face of the man who's invented non-costed programs.
I mean, our
Platforms,
journalists
what are they called?
they get mad at you if you try to talk about the costs of things. They'll get mad at you if you don't have costs, but if you try to actually talk to them about what things will cost, they'll be like, "Fuck off! What are you doing?"
Fuck off with that nerd shit.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's nerd shit. I get to get mad at you if you don't have it, but I don't want to hear about it if you do have it. All right,
Yeah, normal country.
it's cool. I can't wait. I can't wait for more Blairite extravaganza. They're gonna put back up the weird. I forgot what they called them, but the weird devices that emit a sound that only like younger people can hear.
Crickets or
It might have been a mosquito was involved in the name.
mosquitoes.
I
something like
forget.
that.
I just remember that they had devices to repel teenagers, which is the most British invention of all time. And there's no way they don't come back. It's time culturally. It's gonna happen.
There was a YouTuber that put that sound in all their videos so that it would annoy anyone under like 25 watching them.
Fuck, that's so smart. I should start doing that.
Justin,
write that down,
your
write that
idea
down.
for the podcast just came to me.
No, we need the young gay children. How else
That's
will
true.
we keep them from hanging out on 4chan and picking up weird vocabulary that's hurting them?
Yeah, becoming weird, trying like Catholics trying to restore the French monarchy or whatever. You need just no, let's corral them here. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like the other day, our prime minister put out a campaign ad that used Little Dark Age. Like,
Oh no.
it's like it was probably made by a Zoomer staffer, and it like appeals to a very narrow subset of like Zoomer fascists, which I think is awesome. It's not like a sound electoral policy. That's not a big voting block. It's just insane as a move, you know.
You're busy lying down.
Yeah, they're lying down. Kyle's showing us. Kyle, youthful, vigorous as always, is showing us what it's like, you know.
Yeah, I feel very youthful today.
Are you actually recording out of that microphone, or do you have a secret microphone somewhere else? And that
But if
one's
this
just
weren't
for the
plugged in,
aesthetic?
that would be pretty funny if this just were plugged into nothing.
And if you had one of those little tiny ones,
Yeah.
I hate.
I
the
do
little
love
tiny
people who
ones.
make
Get
fun
into
of
my
that, and
glasses.
they're like, guys, I just learned about that, and they're just talking into various different objects throughout like their video, and it keeps switching. That's what they're talking into.
Yeah.
All right. Enough talking about Zoomers. Instead, let's talk about Zurichers. See, this is where my lack of knowledge of both geography and 16th century German politics is really gonna become apparent, and I can only apologize in advance. The one note I did while me and Jay were playing this game was it takes place mercifully before a time when Germans were allowed to unify. That's one of the great upsides.
Oh, the golden age. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, and I don't know history about anything, so I was like, "Wait, Holy Roman Empire," and Justin had to explain to me that it's not the neither Holy nor Roman nor an empire thing, and I was like, "What the fuck is it?"
It's a
So
vibe.
this game was very confusing to me. I was like, "What is happening?"
A series of church offices and Germans who hire mercenaries.
Yeah, most of my like medieval knowledge is restricted to England or like weirdly Andalusia, and like that's it.
All you need to know is that they get taller as you go up. That's all you need to know with any at any point of German history. Yeah, it's honestly confusing, but I have played a lot of Crusader King, and that's how I know all of my stuff. I have not studied any of this in a formal setting, but instead have done the more important and studious thing, which is play video games. And I know Kay also went to the same school of gaming that I have. Well,
nice,
absolutely. Skittles is playing with the loudest toy in the house. I have to take it away from her. I will be back in 1 second.
I thought that might be Abby playing with something.
Oh no, she is yelling in the other room though, and that I can't do anything about. So
I don't hear it.
Just have to. Yay, good.
Hi, Abby.
I will give my best.
Yeah, I did leave a bag of pellets on the ground after it was empty, but they were like, "No, this is a trick. You're gonna wrap me up and take me to the vet in this or something." So they have not played with it.
We're on to your game.
She doesn't care about that toy at all until the second I start trying to record something.
She knows.
Yeah, she does. Looking at me like I'm a dick now. Listen.
It's the only way rabbits look at you.
So true. So true.
All right. So Pentiment is a game, non-AAA game. It's, if you've seen a Paper Mario, it's kind of like that, kind of looks like that, but all fancy. It begins in 1518. You're a journeyman illustrator, painter named Andreas Mailer at Kearsall Abbey near Tassing. And then it turns into Name of the Rose, where a guy gets murdered and you got to do some medieval sleuthing while also mostly avoiding doing your job, which is pretty sick.
Yeah.
You just kind of run around, talk to village people, talk to old Smokey in the woods. And
that queen, oh girl.
Fucking love Smokey.
He's good. Smokey's the best character.
Yeah, he just gossips. I'm like, yes.
Mm-hmm. And you try and solve the murder, and I would describe it as a choices matter game where your choices don't matter.
They kind of matter.
Like history.
Yeah. Also like life.
I mean, you get people killed. Those choices matter. But
yeah,
you can get different people killed.
Sorry you don't care about the lives of the people around you, but
it's kind of go out of your hand.
You do put off your work a lot, which means a lot of having to pretend that I wouldn't love to be illuminating manuscripts with a bunch of fucking dusty ass monks in the abbey.
Hell
oh my god, that's where I need to be.
Hanging out with those nuns, like being like, "Can I please have a book, please?"
And they'll say, like, no, you make me sick. I fucking hate you. And I'll be like, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, right above the book glory hole. Very strategically positioned.
Yeah. I mean, those monks were making use of that, let me tell you.
Oh, yeah.
Was it Matthias and the other one?
The singer.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all found that out in y'all's place or where you observed them fucking in the library.
I certainly
That was our
did.
main quest in this game, was to find out which of the monks were fucking.
Yeah.
I was muted, so y'all didn't just hear the unholy
Did
noise
you not
I
see
made
that part, Sadie?
when Justin said book glory.
Well, I was just waiting because they keep opening like the thing, and I just wanted to wait for like the bottom one to slide open when you're talking to like Zednia or whoever.
Yeah, it's just Zednia's like skirt up, like.
I love her. I wish nothing but the best for her.
I was so sad when we didn't find out what happened to her after in the third act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will be spoiling this
went back to
game.
her rich family. Yeah.
Put a spoiler note in the notes, but yeah, it's a game it's hard not to spoil, but it's like a detective game, but it has a thesis that's kind of focused around history and layers, which I thought I haven't played this game, which is Forgotten City, and I never finished it, but I do know that that's kind of the thesis, is you're going into layers underneath the city to discover the history of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Someone
also
should make a video about
material, that. Yeah, like material culture. And like the library plays a big part in that in this game.
Yeah, we discussed some of that. Like the comparison to the Forgotten City is really good, And something that's kind of revealed in from the very title of the game, Pentiment, it's about the function of history as it sort of history doesn't like work itself out in like a neat line, but is much closer to like the function of human memory, in that there are these series of acts of preservation and acts of memory and forgetting that occur over a period of time that have a direct effect on not just the events of history themselves, but the way that they play out and then are then documented and preserved into the future. Historical preservation is this thing that is accepted understandably by the public as, history is the stuff that happened. The documentation is what we use to support and verify that thing happened. And sure, that's part of it, but the thing that is harder to describe is discourse, and the way that the actual documenting of historical events is embroiled in social conflict. And so Pentiment being a game it needed to be in the style of like Umberto Eco, right? It needed to be, if it was going to use fiction to grapple with things like memory and historical preservation, and yes, material culture is a big part of it. It all within this setting. It has this very top down, I think it's very masterful in the way that it thinks through history, because it is about, it does imagine history as this living, breathing, and moving thing. It does so using technology inspired by using one of the most important like moments in European history, and the transition between the late medieval and the early modern period. Transitions in national identity, in cultural representation, in religion is a huge part. The game religion is probably the most important part of the entire game. I said technology. You know what I mean? It's a game that really understands how history is made and its own complexity, and it does that in such a way that I haven't really seen in a lot of video games outside of something like The Forgotten City. Okay, I don't know if you have anything.
I think it gives you this opportunity to think about questions that are obvious to ask but not easy to answer when thinking about history, which is, okay, so we supposedly have this information. Where did it come from? Why was this document made? Who recorded it? Under what conditions, etc.? So you walk amongst one of the most prolific and in their way unreliable sources of sort of medieval history, which is monastic sources. They wrote a lot down, especially depending on the country. I know in the Irish case, they wrote a fuckload down. But also, I can't think of a source that's more clearly coming through, like, there are things you can and cannot say. There are things that it will be, to be safe, you have to represent in certain ways, and so on. And that's just, in some cases, what we have. So to put you in the position where you're making these people into real, to characters you can interact with, who have thoughts and feelings about the world, I just think it really enriches your ability to think about, like, reading what would otherwise be kind of, a dusty old document, and actually think about who made this and how should I think about what would prompt them to say these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's really impressive to get like a lay person and like a non-history person and a non-like archives person to be like, I gotta find out what happened to the bibliographic logs of these nuns. It's really important for me as a human to find out this information.
Yeah.
And that's true. Like that information is important. The kind of stuff that we put in library catalogs, right? The stuff that people are always afraid of losing, like, processing notes, provenance, like, where did this book come from? Where did it get moved to? Did we sell it? Who sold it to us? And of course, with the handwritten tradition, there's a lot of fear of scribal errors and interpolations and all kinds of, and that's a part of the gameplay design too, is people will miswrite something and then rewrite it. They didn't go as far as like rewrite a whole sentence, which would have been fun, but the rewriting over old things was cool.
One thing that I really liked too was that I think a lot of people nowadays don't realize that copies of the same thing are going to have different information in them. because that's a whole plot point too, is the history of the town, the book of the history of this town. Like the former abbot is looking for a different copy so he can substantiate the one that the library has, because what if it's a copy of the same book, but it clearly has different information in it according to the plot. So like, yeah, you wonder like, what's the difference between these two things that are nowadays we would think would be the exact copy because printing is so automatic. But yeah, then it's like it could be the same thing, but it could actually contain very different information.
Totally. I last year I found myself reading a lot of the Florentine Codex, which is a document written by Spanish. God, was he a friar? I forget. He was a Spanish religious figure, Sahagún, who wrote it in collaboration with indigenous people in Latin America who he had a role in their kind of Christian education. So these people kind of had a foot in both sides, and they would write these accounts and then he would translate them into Spanish. But to the degree that we have access to their original accounts, the notes and changes that he makes are very consistent with what you would think of a Spanish Christian. And also that, they really recontextualize certain things. So this is a document that is not just rewritten, but it's also translated very non-accurately, intentionally. And so to the degree that we have access to these different versions of it, it is in the creation of these documents themselves that you see kind of history in motion. You see the colonial perspective clashing with the indigenous account of these sort of like traditions and rituals or battles that had happened. And it's impossible to just take one of those documents on its own and say, oh, well, this is about this. We read this, now we know about this. You have to engage with it as something in its historical context that's being made by people who are themselves not even able to speak freely. There's things this guy could not have written, or he would have been in incredible trouble with, for one, the Inquisition, to say the least.
Right.
And then the people under him, who knows what they're prepared to tell this Spanish friar who probably had some degree of control over them.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about the sort of perceived unity of the gaze of modernity or post-modernity or post-postmodernity, wherever
I'm a
we
gay
are.
modernity.
Yeah, several of us.
Gender? What is this, Soviet Russia?
Oh shit, that's a good one.
Oh, come on, Kyle, you can bring it back. You can do this. Remember what we were talking about.
Sorry, babe.
We're joking earlier about the being blessed by pre-unity Germany, which is true, but also a really important point about like pre-imperial Germany. Imperial Germany is where the historical seminar was like invented, and the historical seminar is modeled after the Ronchian colloquium, right? Loqui, like speaking together, basically. So the whole format of the way that at least universities in the modern era, the way that we document and understand history is much less in flux than it was in the pre-imperial German period, which is much more about church sources and official like sources from churches, from the monarchy. You don't hear as much about. That's why a lot of the events of early modern Germany became really important, not just in the Protestant Reformation, because of the advent of printmaking and it's not like an immediate decrease in official church sources. There's always official church sources, but all of a sudden there are these new sort of avenues, not just of individual expression, but of like actual practical like methods for exercising agency for people who aren't doing the type of documentation that we're used to. And Pentiment as a game grapples with that directly, right? And it does so, what I think is kind of perfect about it does so artistically in a lot of ways, right? It's about style, and like there's an old style done by an older person, and then there's a new style done by a newer person. But all of this is already becoming really dusty, right? Doing all this by hand and not doing printmaking or whatever. You can feel the sort of like the life, if you will, like the actual like living, breathing cultural practice, kind of like you can feel it kind of dissipating as the game sort of tells you about its own environment. You realize that, oh, this thing that I'm looking at, I think anybody can realize this is why it's such a good game. This thing that I'm looking at is a dying art, and history is changing. Even if you don't understand the super important transitions out of the late medieval period, like it becomes really apparent that, and then by the time you get to the end of the game, you realize that you've already been living in the history's fictions, right? You've already been sort of embroiled in this mystery that, as it turns out, is the result of people's actual agency and the decisions that they make, the historical decisions that individual people have been making. And I think that's really brilliant.
Yeah, there's a really good, I guess in the first act, you are kind of just doing a more or less by the numbers murder mystery. You are aware that like this is one of the last active scriptoriums. You have a friend who's a printer. You meet like other professionals and they have their resentments about the peasantry, as do the monastics. Everyone's kind of looking down on the peasantry, and you notice the peasantry is not taking that very well as things are changing about what can you do with common land. This is, a pivotal period of history where commons are being enclosed. And as the game goes on, they become, particularly the forest becomes more and more enclosed. So you can't pick up sticks. You can't cut down trees. Now you can't go gather acorns or herbs, and you can't graze your hogs, or else, and then you have like more wandering soldiers as the game goes on as well, where that militaristic control of poaching is more and more enforced, and there's more and more state control that comes along with, as well as, Protestantism. Martin Luther gets name dropped a few times, mostly to annoy people, I think, is why he's brought up.
Making dinner worse. That's what.
Yeah,
that's what Protestantism is.
Murder motive, Protestantism.
True and justified.
Yeah.
I mean, Protestantism is such a great kind of looming specter in this game, right? It's this seemingly unchallengeable status quo that is beginning to crumble all around sort of everyone in and out of the Abbey in this game. And so it's fitting that one of the first, I feel like it's one of the first things that happens is you have that conversation with, I haven't played in a bit, so I forget his name, but the fancy guy who comes to town, that's our guy. And he's like, so buddy, what do you think about Martin Luther? Which, probably would have been a spicy thing to ask someone, but also a conversation people were going to be having.
Yeah, it felt very like, so do you think climate change is real? Sort of like prompt like that, like a silence falls over as everybody decides how they're going to like approach this like conversation, depending on the person who asked the question, kind of like, yeah, it was I really liked that part of it. Like Martin Luther is the specter in the room that nobody wants to address, sort of thing.
Because it's an inherently political question. Like you might think, oh, this is like a theological question, but it's like, no, what is me, a rich man, asking a journeyman about to become a master artist about Martin Luther? What does that mean about the politics of this place? It means, hey, what do you think about getting rid of all these monks and nuns and archbishops and taking the state into our own hands? What do you think about that, huh?
Yeah, there's no differentiation between the two, right? The theological has not yet evolved in this, the theological becomes this sort of like boil on the flesh of the Enlightenment that it's just constantly having to deal with or treat or, sublate in some capacity or whatever, like pushing it back in or something like that. It's the world as it was. And I think that's a perspective that could be really easy to lose if not for texts like this one that give us a chance to remember what it was like when the world felt so much smaller, but the universe as a result had this particular character too. I've been writing about it because I've been trying to write a book that deals with history and trying to deal with to not be Whiggish or teleological while still trying to grapple with the absolute of the passage of time. The idea that these people in this game, the fictionalized versions of real people most of the time, inspired by real people, sat under the same stars that we do for all intents and purposes, but not in such a way that invites this static interpretation of the way that we see the world, but instead invites the idea of flux into the absolute. So history all of a sudden is like profoundly theological. And in the same way that the social is bound up in this theological stuff, because what do you fucking do besides listen to people talk about the Bible and the 5 other things that you do throughout the day, right? The peasantry, the peasantry unfortunately did not have TikTok. So they can,
Klaus the zine maker.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, like it's interesting what you say about like theology, because like in like Rochvogel as this like rich dude comes in and is like, hey, how about that Protestantism, huh? Fuck these monks and stuff. Which like that's a part of Protestantism that I'm like, yeah, but like in Act 2, we very much get the more like bottom up approach to that, where it's
Thomas
like we get a
Munzer,
hot communist that's like, we have to defend the commons and we have to take all, like we have the means of production and all that. But that is still like how we say like communism is also a really kind of like in like the way that then like you couldn't separate the political from the theological. It's like Act 2 of this game is showing what that looks like when it comes from the peasantry instead of from like the educated aristocratic class.
It's a dialectical form, right? Like it has this. We're so historiography. Not to do the inside baseball too much because it's honestly boring, but like contemporary historiography is not concerned with this way of looking. Like it's too grand of a narrative, way too grand of a narrative, way too all encompassing. The potential for it goes too far, and you have to deconstruct, and you have to talk about particularity and difference and mentalities and all of this other French stuff. Which this is an important criticism, but the point that really I think important point that you're making is, when the Thomas Munzer inspired peasant rebellion stuff comes in, that was in all actuality that was itself acting as a propelling mechanism for historical change. Was the most useful example that I think lots of people have become more familiar with, for some of us who beat the drum all the time, is Haiti. Haiti is another example of this. You like dismantling the master's house with his own tools. In that case, very literally. But this idea that criticizing something using its own ideas is one of the most important parts about the peasants' rebellion in actuality is that they got slaughtered.
Yeah,
it's a
which
shame.
happens in the game too.
Yeah, exactly. Things, people get killed, shit gets raised, it gets real bad, and it gets real nasty. And so now all of a sudden we're forced to grapple with the idea of defeat of something good. Like if we can point out as like an objective, people should not toil as much as they do, which we can say in our contemporary perspective as an absolute, right? I think even people with horrible politics would in some ways agree with that statement. It's what you do with the defeat itself. All of a sudden, agency in historical documentation and storytelling becomes important. If you neglect history, then the defeat is always the defeat. It becomes this kind of, it sets in as this kind of melancholy without a motivation toward, you don't really learn the lesson, I think is what I think.
That's also what I wanted to talk about, how time changes in this book, because peasant revolts throughout the medieval period were kind of like, they had a circular nature to them. You take too much, conditions get too bad, the peasants revolt, you wipe them out, things kind of go back to normal. And this peasant revolt at the end of Act 2, so throughout this part, you're writing like a book of hours, and you see how time goes through the book of hours through the day. So Martins and Nons and everything like that. And after this peasant rebellion in which you are crushed, the next act opens with a mechanical clock. And now time goes according to a mechanical clock, and you are now a printmaker's daughter and a printer yourself. And that's kind of why this is the transition to the modern age, because the way we start to think about time becomes different. It loses the circular quality to it and gains this modern industrial logic to the forward motion of time that everyone is sort of stuck with. And I really like, with the moment I saw that the way time was depicted had changed, that was a brilliant design choice.
Big agree. That may be my favorite sort of like subtle moment in the game. It's kind of chilling in a way as well, because this game wants you to think so much about a lot of the more quite horrific, really, aspects of this transition towards an industrial modernity. It is that enclosure. It is that new way of measuring time. And just to take a step back to, you mentioned a little while ago, I think really correctly, the class character of the conversation between the Baron and Andreas about this sort of looming Protestantism. And then, as you say, you get the peasant perspective, which is really not, it's very different, because they're seeing Protestantism, even if it's not put into words in this way, as really the ideological shift towards this new bourgeoisie's ownership of everything, and the cutting up and parceling off of what was once just, God's gift to humanity as things that dickheads own. And now you can't hunt, and now you can't fish, you can't even fucking forage or let your animals graze. And that's like, when you read what few peasant sources we do have from the era of enclosure, there's a really good poet. I'm so bad with names. I wish I'd prepared that. But there's a poet, he wrote a poem, I think, called The Oak Tree. He was a peasant at the time of enclosure. And when you see how these people talk about it, it's nothing short of apocalyptic. Like,
yeah, they're like millenarists or whatever it's called.
Yeah. So I'm still trying to remember that guy's name. He was like John something. English people didn't have the most excited names. I don't think
Wordsworth isn't until the 19th century.
Yeah, no. This guy was earlier.
Romantic poet.
Anyway. Yeah, the entire just sort of order of human existence for so long was not just collapsing, but being actively taken away by people you could point to and say, no, that guy is telling me he owns this now, And so it's not surprising the anger that it's met with as well.
I mean, Silvia Federici talks about this at the beginning of Caliban and the Witch, where she's talking about the heretical sects and how a lot of them are very like proto-communist and proto-anarchist, and like this like defense of the commons as such, and how that ties into these theological beliefs as well. Like, these aren't separate issues during this time.
Yeah, if I'm a Bavarian peasant, then this is like, these developments are in such extreme defiance of God,
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that I thought was really interesting was when the peasant revolt is like starting to ramp up, is that like Otto, who's the one who's sort of leading the whole thing, is like, I have a signal from God that what the monastery is locking down on us is actually against like what he wants, like what God wants. So it's like, it's taking the religion of this town and using it for a very different purpose than like the abbot has been up until that point in the game. And then of course, at the end, spoiler alert, you find out that the signal that Otto found is actually something very, very, very different, and ties back into the whole motivation of the murders that happen along the way. So like, I thought that was a really interesting like twist too, because it does speak to history. Like Otto couldn't read, right? So many of these characters, how you perceive them depends on whether or not they're like literate or educated. And Otto couldn't read, so he found this sign from God that like the commons and everything is for the peasantry. But then you learn later from a literate character that's not what that was at all. It in fact hints at the very much like deeper past of the town and the things that like the layers of history that it's built on, right? So like Otto was right, but he wasn't right in the way that he wasn't right in the context of the game.
But it still is a sign from God if you think about it.
But it is still a sign from God, right? So it's like the whole time I'm like, fuck yeah, Otto, like you lead that revolution in your town, right? But at the same time, it's like you come to find out that like, oh, this thing that he was so dependent on that got him killed over, he's one of the murder victims, is actually a sign that the town has pagan roots. And that's what somebody's been killing, multiple people to hide. And what does that mean for the town? And what did that mean for the peasant resolution in the end too? So yeah, the way that they use theology throughout this game is utterly fascinating, I think.
There's a bit of a range in the game of the extent to which different characters, I should say the extent of maybe the sincerity of their religious belief. Like the Baron, you don't get the impression that he's a particularly devout man in any way. He's really having a very, in a way, secular political conversation with you through a theological discussion. Whereas, obviously, a lot of people at the Abbey, that is not shocking. Otto, there's a lot of people who are, very when they talk to you about theological subjects, there's a sincerity to it, that they're not necessarily having those veiled political conversations. And that's really, I think that before this period, in my view at least, before this period, it's a lot easier to attribute a pretty high level of sincerity on the basis that what else would a person really believe? You know, this sort of like pre-Enlightenment, the presence of these religious views are just kind of the reality on which your society is based. And a big thing that happens around this period is you start to see that fracturing. Things that were just unquestionable facts for a very long time become highly questionable. And so you start to, and I think this game is really adept at having some people who are maybe engaging more cynically in and out of the church with this than others. And I think also as historians, you're always asking yourself that. You're always asking, do I read this in full sincerity? Do I read this from like a cynical 21st century kind of secular perspective? I think doing that often is tempting, but actually leads you astray more often than not. But I think we're starting to get into a time period where it starts to get more valuable to do that.
Well, yeah, it's about our engagement with historicity, right? The depiction of history as such. So the historians have that extra step where you have to take, how am I going to, it's an interpretation. The whole game is about the process of interpretation and sort of this another looming specter of like deconstruction. The game begins, first of all, with the game that is about writing a story and documenting a story begins with erasure.
Yes.
But then also couples that erasure with one of the most like, in the beginning was the word, right? One of the most important sort of like introductory phrases in literary history. The ultimate like deconstructive phrase that sort of has indeed loomed like in the way that the Gospels themselves do. So I don't know. I think that's all. I think that's all right on. I mean, and like it just comes back to, and I don't have to belabor the point because we already covered it. It like at one point there were conflicts over there's always been conflicts over the sort of the quote unquote the spirit of the social world. And from the very origins of Christianity, like the best way to understand is through those conflicts and through that change, because what you start to find is you start to see individual people who are maybe motivated by virtue, maybe motivated by profound like theological belief, maybe motivated by politics, often by some measure of all three of those. But you find that there is indeed competition over the legacy of a particular set of beliefs or a time or a place, in this case a town, right? So it's not just about like the grand narrative gets boiled down into these small moments that like, I mean, I think, Sadie, the point that you made sort of captures that like we like, rounding out this sort of formalist conversation of the game. Like, what is the game trying to say? And that's what it is, that they're like the sense of historical change is bound up in these small, seemingly innocuous conversations you're having with people that are actually filled with all of this discourse reigns supreme, I guess. I guess is the takeaway in some ways.
Yeah, one of the things I was surprised about in smaller acts too was because I want to talk more about the layers that the game is focused on. But I was kind of surprised when there was a part where, as a punishment for the peasants, in addition to foraging and not being able to use the forest, they lock up the shrine of Moritz so that you can't see the relic anymore, except for people who are coming there from out of town to visit it and buy trinkets and make a religious pilgrimage. There we go. And everyone in the town, particularly the peasants, seem to know a lot about the pagan origins of the town. And you also talk to, what's his name? Till, who is literate but can't speak Latin. But he's really interested in all the Roman parts of the city. And so he basically explains to you what the big reveal of the game is, which is that the saints story is actually just taken from a Roman myth, which was also just taken from a pagan myth. And I just wrote down, like, Till watched Zeitgeist one time and won't shut up about it. Because he just keeps talking about, it's like, well, you really know where all these stories come from. And Jay had a critique of that, about how all of these stories aren't necessarily building off each other. There's sometimes just synchronicity, and humans make the same stories. They're not necessarily always taking from other place. But
sometimes
religion's syncretic, and particularly Roman religion is very syncretic, and Christianity is very syncretic. And so they love taking stories and going, oh, that was actually this god. Romans love doing that. They love going into barbarian lands and being like, oh yeah, they worship Mercury. And, he's talking about Odin or something. And so I like how the peasants are the ones who are kind of the most keyed into the history of the town. And the point of all the murders is to keep people from learning that there is a Mithraeum under the town and that the saints never actually in real history came to the town. And you have the hand of the saint, which is funny because if you know anything about like relics, there's like 15 foreskins of Jesus. There's like 5 hands of everyone. There's 90 million pieces of the true cross.
It was huge. All right.
90 million pieces of the true cross is the actually the name that we're changing Agab to. That's the name.
Oh, that would go so fucking hard.
Yeah. If you could cut that out, I'd appreciate it for not blowing up our spot.
I'm sorry, I was reading ahead in the notes.
It's also interesting that the relic is a hand, I think. I think that's very important because, again, like so much of this story is about documentation and like literally like even the non-literate characters, when we see their dialogue, it looks as if it's being written down. It's like the literate characters have a different penmanship, and then like the printmakers, theirs is actually printed, which is so fucking cool. And then like all the monks and stuff have this like really annoying like Gothic font. But like even the non-literate characters, it looks as if their dialogue is being written like in real time almost. So it's like everything is being like we are actively seeing and participating in the creation of all of this history through the process of writing.
And I really like that they drew that back just to the plot of the whole game too, because the whole thing that kind of threads the 3 acts together is the idea of this thread puller who has been leaving notes for the townsfolk, right?
Yeah.
And it's a distinct ink and a distinct penmanship that Andreas, who is university educated and has like lived around the world, and Magdalene, who is the printer's daughter who has lived here her entire life, neither of them recognize the script, but the town is so small that you've literally talked to everybody a million times. So like, where is this script coming from? Right. And that's kind of the thread. Well, yeah, the thread puller that holds all 3 acts into like one consistent plot, which I thought was a really good twist on how they use the text in the game as, things being written out and things being printed as they're being said and done. So
I just want to say that I was right when I guessed it when me and Justin were playing.
Same with me and my wife when we were playing it. We were like, it's got to be, right? That's like the only right? Can we talk ill Il Peter though? Can we just? I
Il
just
Peter. I love this old bastard.
He was just like
refuses to die because he's too angry.
He's too angry and too old and too sick. And and like talks about how like you have to you have to circle the house from the right to go piss in the night so the witches don't get you. And how like the previous abbot knew that was like even if they were doing these old pagan like habits and rituals, like he still knew that God lived in their hearts, which is like right, like such an interesting way. Like Kyle, like you've been saying, how like the older people of the town, the town knows the history if you just pay attention to what people are actually saying. Right.
That makes the finale so interesting because the entire the murders and a whole lot of this, it comes down to a character is trying to prevent this revelation of the pre-Christian roots of the town. And when you get to that point, it can feel weird, right? Because like you were saying, you probably already long since knew this. You meet characters who know this, but there's a difference between the shit that the peasants are saying and archaeological evidence. And I think it's noteworthy that actually archaeology, not long after this game takes place, starts to really... It's always been done as long as, at least pre like Egypt, but it starts to really become a big field and a way of constructing history specifically for, those nations that are in power during the Enlightenment. And so archaeological evidence is like, no, this has to be stopped. Even if people know, there's knowing, and then there's capital K knowing,
there's
because
proof. Yeah.
proof. Yeah. And well, and I think it's interesting too, because like in the second act, the inn, the pretty much the only thing that's really changed about the town is that the inn has been built and it's called the Golden Hand. And the wife of the inn owner is one of your suspects during that act, and her whole motivations are just straight up economical, right?
Yeah.
So if the Hand of Moritz is not the Hand of Moritz and Moritz never actually existed in the town, then there's no reason for people to come to her inn, because there's no reason for people to come to the Hand or to come to the town. And that's very much wrapped up in, the antagonists, the thread pullers' motivations too. Is it's not just theological, we can't have proof that this is really a pagan myth. It's also that like the entire, he feels like he's protecting the entire town, right? From economical collapse, which is already on such rocky ground from the peasant, with the peasantry who are starving to death and all of that. So like, there's not just theological, there's not just political, there's, the economical is also really wrapped up in it too.
Indulgences, right? Like
Right.
It's the
Mhm.
paying,
Yeah.
it's the paying of indulgence, and the sort of the shift of that, the way that served as a framework for the shift away from that kind of priestly authoritarian theology, which is always been super important to language, and the paying of indulgences being huge parts of all.
I really like the inn. And this is maybe a more me reading into it aspect, but I love the inn because naming it the Golden Hand, it turns this pilgrimage, this very
Mhm.
purely religious thing, into something that feels a bit more like tourism. And again, in the following century, tourism really starts to be a thing with British rich dickheads going on grand tours and stuff. And it's just that little bit of, I guess the best way to put it is like, it doesn't feel as sacred. The sanctity of it declines a bit in the context of this new world. Now it's like we're starting a business that's like playing off it,
And like the scriptorium has closed by this point.
Yeah.
Too. It's like the scriptorium, which was the thing that was bringing in money, has closed, and so now there's the inn that's the thing that is bringing in money.
None of us
outside
can
of the
relate.
monastery.
None of us can relate to that in our hometowns or whatever, right? The one super important thing isn't profitable / good / culturally significant or whatever anymore. So the vacuum gets filled by tourism. It's like
you can go pay too much for a pint. That's what you get now.
Yeah,
be close to water. We can even monetize that, not to get to, epic communism, for lack of a better word, but it's a familiar problem, right?
You want to make something pirate themed? You want to have like a junk shop that's just beach hats and fold out chairs? I finally went down to the island down here in Texas, and it was the most Florida place I've seen in Texas. And I was like, this is just like Sarasota. This is basically just Sarasota. It is uncanny how every Southern Gulf beach town is like, you got a nice beach, build your town to look exactly like this and sell the same shit. I saw a $200 pair of flip-flops. I walked into the store and I was like, all right, I'm leaving. That's the craziest thing I've seen in my entire life.
Amazing.
That was the cheapest ones.
Yeah. Kay, you mentioned something about like the archaeology aspect of this game, and it reminded me of the fact of the miller's son, the little gay art boy, how he's like contributing to the ruins almost, because he's the one drawing on, right? And drawing in the old salt mine and everything. And so there's like this quote dead archaeology, like these dead ruins that people are trying to hide. But then there's like this history of like a person actively interacting with it and creating more things, because when Magdalena, because you pronounce the E's at the end of German words, like gets to actually go down to the mine, there's drawings down there too, right? So there's this continuation, like nothing ever changes, everything's the same, but in a cool, like history is alive, and like we've all been making dick jokes since the beginning of time kind of way.
Absolutely. And I feel like that sits really comfortably alongside which maybe historical facts, for lack of a better word, are threatening or convenient at any given time. Because at this point, these Roman roots are a huge fucking problem. You fast forward a century, Enlightenment thinkers are desperate to connect anything they can to Greece, to Rome. Yeah, like neoclassicism, it gets so big that people, if they could have held out for a while, there would have been a lot of people who would have been hyped that there was a Roman ruin there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, my hottest take is that the Enlightenment was just like proto-fascism.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
It's when the world fell under darkness. We're
fuck the Enlightenment, actually.
I shouldn't know how to read right now, and I'm pissed.
Right, exactly. I should be like fucking a hot communist in Bavaria.
Oh, so true.
Just be like, God wants me to just have my pigs roam the woods, actually, and that's I do love that. Yeah. I love the threat of religious violence, just like that scene in Last Temptation. It's like, be careful, Zebedee, there is a God. Yeah. I want to yell that at anyone who's like just a piece of shit. Just constantly in the back of my head. But yeah, the people who get remembered and who don't also was a theme in the game. So you see like the graveyard has like all of these big memento moris to like the abbesses and prioresses and abbots. And then you go into the salt mines and you see, the writings of Roman slaves who are how you find out about the ruins underneath the city, which is everyone knows about that they're Roman ruins, but there's a particular Mithraeum that is hidden. And that's what, the string puller is trying to keep secret. And, the townspeople have their own little legacies that they want to keep. And the peasantry kind of do all of that by oral tradition and drawing on stuff.
Well, and I like how that's reflected in the last act of the game too, when you sneak into the broken down abbey and the Dance of Death mural that is in I forget what the name of the room is in the abbey has been painted over. And at that point in time, you're like not entirely certain who's doing the painting, even though it's pretty easy to guess. But and you can actually see, and it's painted over with like the history of the peasant revolt. Like you can actually see the characters from the previous acts in there, even though you, as the protagonist, may or may not recognize all of them. You're like, oh, that's that person. What happened to that person? Because you don't always find out what happened to townspeople after the time jump. So like the Dance of Death, I think, was a really interesting like way to put it too, because it's just a very formal monastic piece of art with clearly a single person working through their shit on top of it, right? And that's the other thing that I really, really loved about this game. And I mean this in a I truly do love this, is I love that Andreas was a coward.
He's a piece of shit, yeah.
I love, and even with all of the different decisions you can make throughout the game and all the different influences, like in the end, he's still a fucking coward, right? And I love cowardly protagonists because like you can see the decision making that's happening like as you go. And in this game, you get to make the decisions, but like in books and other things where I've read with a similar protagonist, it's like you see how their cowardly decisions sometimes lead to noble or not noble outcomes, like or things that happen that weren't exactly their intention. They were just trying to like fumble their way through the best at the time. So, and also,
we're forced into those decisions in the first two acts. Like, no matter what you do, you send someone to death, and as a player, that's not the person who did it,
right? Or you don't know. You don't know if you actually have all of the information to solve it, right? Like it, and it never tells you. Like the townspeople believe in whatever decision you, as Andreas, have made. They believe it
because there's the thread puller, but then there's the people who actually do what the thread puller wants them to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like in the final act, when like you learn, and this is again, big spoiler, you learn that Andreas didn't die in the fire at the end of the second act. You learn that he's actually been living in the ruins for 18 years because he was too fucking depressed to figure out what to do next, which I think is
he didn't want to go home to his bitch wife.
He didn't want to go home to his wife and his dead son. He was, like, and I feel like, and then, you have Andreas's internal representation of Beatrice and Prester John and the fucking jester in that. And I think it's like, because overall, like the game is really about the town and the things that you can like learn and discover, under this sort of murder mystery plot. But like, then there's also that point where it's like, oh, you learn that Andreas is making these sort of decisions that you can't get out of. Like you only have so many choices because he's fucking depressed, and all of the things and his fame that he's gathered since like the first act and all of this, like none of it really changes the outcome of things, because in the end, no matter what you do or what you decide, he's still going to like hide for 18 years under under a burned down library, only to emerge at the very
Whomst
end.
amongst us.
Yeah, who amongst us doesn't desire that? But like only for at the end for him to emerge in like the 11th hour, finally deal with his shit, only to see the people who also had to deal with his shit die at the last second, right? So like it's not just this sort of overarching like historical thing, but there's also the very personal narrative of Andreas in there too. And then what Magdalena can sort of do with that legacy moving forward too, right? I feel like that's where the decisions that you make throughout the game actually matter. I've only done one playthrough, so I don't know how much influence it has in the end, but it's really about what Magdalena decides to do after everything is all said and done. So I think it's a really good, like, sort of personal journey for the people who may or may not be interested in the historic parts of the game, who might actually be able to tie into like that sort of personal narrative that is also going throughout. So I thought that was really well done as well.
Yeah, like I felt so
fucking love
powerless
this game.
playing Andreas because it's like I didn't want him to have this weird, like I wanted to make him like a gay little like artist who went to Florence and hung out, but like it kept trying to force me to be like my bitch wife about like his wife, and I was like, no, I don't want that answer either. Like it just like
Right?
kept forcing us to like feel like Justin said, the like so many times like we'd be going through like a dialogue tree and we'd like pick something very specifically, and at the end it still made us eventually wind back around to say something we didn't want to say.
Right.
And I was like, no, we didn't want to say that one.
Sometimes you have to. It's Rodney Dangerfield time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, how much is history like that? Like, no matter what you do,
Yeah.
the outcome, you know, on a personal level, the outcome is always the library burning down, and is always
If I had
Andreas.
been at the Library of Alexandria, things would have been different.
Yeah.
Things wouldn't have gone
Wouldn't have
that
gone down like that.
But I'm different.
There was one thing after the game, because I didn't finish the full playthrough, so I just watched kind of the end. And the playthrough I watched, you decide to tell the truth about the Mithraeum and whatever's under the town. And then after the game, you pull away from the book that you started with, and you are standing in the town meeting place. I forget the German word. And you see that there is a family tree that's been added by Andreas in the years that he's lived in the town. And one of the ones shows like a kid that you didn't meet. And he's like stolen the relic from the shrine and like presumably never came back with it.
Good.
Was it Andreas, or was it the kid that was named after Andreas?
Oh, good point.
I'm pretty certain that
Yeah,
it's
because there's a little baby.
It's Paul, the gay little miller's artist's son's son that he named after is the one.
I was wondering
who's
whose
so
kid that
funny.
was. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, no, which I thought was an interesting touch. And that's one of the things that I wonder how that family tree or that changes depending on the things that you have decided throughout the game. So like, but yeah, it's like you start as an artist, you continue as an artist in like the way that Magdalena is like a printer's maker and does woodcuts and stuff. And then you see this amateur artist's kid become the town artist. So how art also just sort of continually flows throughout the whole game and ends with it as well.
Yeah.
Well, it's looking like we might have to wrap up soon, and I'm realizing that I could talk about this game for fucking ever.
Yeah, we barely started.
I
When did
know.
we- I feel,
How
has it been?
I
looked at the clock and
We
went,
didn't even
"Oh."
talk about the Laquarium.
Actually,
Right?
I actually have something to say about the Lacarium.
Say it.
All right, so one of you noted that the Lacarium is not in use, really. It doesn't do anything in the game, and I thought that was wonderful. First of all, less important reason, obviously, this is Kirisu Abbey is heavily based off of a real-life abbey of St. Moritz, and so that might just be there because it's there, but I think it's there because the Lacarium is a place for monks to discuss freely. It is a bit of like a common area, and I think it's really appropriate that it's in disuse, because I can't think of anything more dangerous at the time this game is taking place for a lot of these monks than to be speaking freely, if you get what I
Isn't
mean.
it also where they can speak with the peasantry or like the common like the lay people as well.
Absolutely, and because of the divide, it's better for the monks not to be talking to the peasants, like for the monks' own safety a lot of the time, and possibly vice versa. The fact that room is distinctly empty and largely pointless, I love that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I did have a good running joke where I would just run across like several screens because there's no fast travel in this game, which has been like one critique I saw is like there's a lot of wasted space sometimes, but I would just be like, hang on, gotta check something, run across like 4 screens and then go into the loquarium and be like, anybody loquating in here? All right. And then just run back out. I was going to do this one time, like right when I think Act 2 started. I was like, how badly do I want to annoy Jay right now? Because I was going to run across the entire map and do it from the village farm to the aquarium. Like, hang on, I got to check something.
The map. Yeah, check
the
this real quick.
opposite end of the map. But I didn't do that. I thought about it really loudly, though.
We were running out of time.
Yeah. But it's a good game if you are like me and like to check every corner, because that's kind of where the game is just talking to people. Like there's no speed running this game. It's really like just you piece it all together through all the conversations you have. And so it works perfect for someone who plays like me, because I'm like, don't miss anything. Check every corner, talk to every person, get every dialogue tree. But that takes forever to get through a game when you do that. All right. Well, then we'll wrap up. Okay, Kyle, thank you so much. I'll have links to All Gamers Are Bastards, and you should check out their Patreon for even more episodes about people in video game sound design who are running for elected office. And I've linked to Kay's video about Pentiment and Forgotten City, which I forgot that Pentiment was part of that. I only remembered the Forgotten City part. And so when you were like, someone should do a video on that, I couldn't remember if you were being sarcastic. And then I went to grab the link and I was like, oh, I hadn't even played Pentiment yet. That was why
I was a dick and interrupted you by accident.
I completely forgot that was what the video was about. So link to that. And yeah, go play Pentiment if you haven't.
Yeah, it's fun.
All right.
Yeah. Well, this is our podcast now. I was going to make a joke, but I ran.
You did entries.
I deflated immediately.
Oh, I forgot to use this one.
Video game now.
Yeah. Behold, the atheist's nightmare.
Good night.